Welcome to What's in a Game. On today's show, we talk about Jamal Murray finally getting his extension. Was it reasonable? Then we're going to rewind to some better days when the Nuggets beat the Boston Celtics, ending their 20-game home win streak. And then finally, Will and I are going to play Would You Rather? Have Jamal or other NBA stars? Welcome back to What's in a Game. I'm Grace Jean here with my co-host Will Jones. How are you doing today, Will?
Good. Jamal is locked up, which I'm happy about.
Yeah, same. It's funny. We recorded our last pod with NBA Chicken, and once again, within like 3 or 4 hours of finishing, I think it was after our NBA Chicken pod last time too, where it was like within a couple hours of that we had the Russ signing, or maybe it was after another pod that we got the news that Jamal Murray got extended. Before we jump into all that, I just had a couple of programming notes. So next week, we're going to be talking about the WNBA. We're going to be talking with Lucas Kaplan, who covers the New York Liberty, about the New York Liberty and the Minnesota Lynx, the two teams that are leading the WNBA standings at the moment and might face off in the WNBA playoffs, which kick off in a couple of weeks. So really excited about that. If you want to understand what we're talking about in the next episode, definitely try to catch a couple of games from the Liberty and the Lynx. They actually play on Sunday, so I will definitely be catching that. And then look out for our episode next week. We're also going to be kind of previewing, the playoff prospects for those teams. But yeah, let's get into it because we actually had a piece of NBA officiating news in the off season. The NBA announced that they're expanding the replay rules for out of bounds plays. That basically is going to allow the referees to review potential fouls that were called when you are challenging an out of bounds. This was something that a lot of fans complained about, and some teams were able to take advantage of, where you have a situation where somebody gets fouled and they like drop the ball out of bounds as a result of said foul, right? And then let's say the ref calls it out of bounds on the other team, like the team that maybe fouled. Your team might have challenged that call on the out of bounds, but if the ref saw that the person got that you got fouled when you dropped that ball, then they couldn't call the foul. They were strictly reviewing for the out of bounds call. So they actually specifically cited an instance that happened in the Western Conference Finals that a lot of people talked about, where I believe it was so the Mavs versus the Wolves, and Jaden McDaniels is the one who got fouled by Kyrie Irving in that instance, and ball goes out of bounds off of him. When that happened, I believe it was the Dallas Mavericks challenged the out of bounds call because the refs called it out of bounds off of Kyrie. They review it, all that. The ball is off of Jaden because he like drops it and like he got hit on the arm by Kyrie. So the Mavs win the challenge and they get control of the ball. Under this new rule, what would have happened is that Dallas would have lost their challenge. The foul would have been called on Kyrie, and Dallas would have, or the Wolves would have gotten the ball back and, baseline out of bounds, sideline out of bounds, as if the foul had been called. And that's what would have happened. But you could also imagine, now that this rule is in place, maybe the Wolves decide they want to challenge that call because they know he got fouled. And they like have an out of bounds call going against them so they could win, on either front. What do you think of this rule change, Will?
I think it's fine. I think anything that gets in the way of not calling the right call, if you're gonna have a review, is a little bit frustrating as a fan. Like, because you're watching the replay and you're like, well, but that's a foul. And you better be careful if you challenge. Don't challenge something where there's like a clear foul and then like that's going to be called or whatever.
Right.
Be selective, be smart about it. I'm not a fan of like replay just in general. So I'm like somebody who leans toward just getting it out of the league completely. I think it would be more fun for me to watch. I'd rather just live with the
I mean, you may as
frustrating.
well be a Timberwolves fan at that point because the teams that just foul a ton
Right.
would probably benefit from having less people see the intricacies of their fouling.
Yeah, then you have to trust the refs, and the Nuggets scheme doesn't have the greatest luck, I guess I would put it, with the refs already. And Jokic usually is one who wins the challenges when he's like, challenge, and then they do it, and it's overturned because Jokic saw something, or like he just knows, and we have to do that. I mean, they added more challenges, which is annoying because it takes a bunch of time, but I
Last
like,
year they added more
yeah,
challenges.
but I
This
like it.
doesn't add more challenges.
No,
Just to be
just
clear
my
for the
general
audience.
thoughts. But the reason why I don't really like challenges is just because it takes too much time. I'm sick of players like always wanting to challenge every single call.
Yeah, but coaches don't go along with that. Like, they don't
Yeah,
challenge every single call for the players.
I just don't like looking at the players do the little finger circle every single play. It's so annoying. I like the idea of having more challenges because it's like, one, what's it gonna do? You're gonna save
But you
it.
hate replay, but you want more
If you're
challenges.
gonna have it, I'd rather you have, just because you have one, you save it for some opportune moment. You use it, maybe it goes your way, maybe it doesn't. Then something else happens at the end of the game, and you're like, I wish I still had another challenge. So it's like, let people challenge if you're gonna let them challenge. I think it's just I'm so apathetic towards replay in general that I don't have a ton of strong opinions. What do you think about it? Were you happy to see it?
I thought it was interesting. Honestly, like you're talking about the Nuggets luck with the refs. I think this one is kind of a wash, to be honest. I do think there are specific teams, and it's ironic, in my opinion, that it seemed to have been the very public nature of this, because that moment with Jaden and Kyrie happened in a clutch moment in a really high profile game. I find it ironic that that was perhaps what spurred the board of governors to say, "Oh, we should change this practice that's been in place for years," right? Like that's how out of bounds calls have been, um, being reviewed, where you could only strictly review the out of bounds call and nothing, quote, proximate to the play was relevant to how the challenge would be. There are teams like the Timberwolves and the Knicks that do, I think, foul more often than other teams, whether they're called for it or not, just because they play very physical defense and all of that. And I think the Knicks in particular are really known, like Tibbs is known for this exact kind of challenge where he knows that his guy like fouled the guy, and that guy dropped the ball as a result, and they can win the out of bounds challenge if that out of bounds call goes against them because they know. Now you could see an instance where that kind of challenge can actually like really blow back on a coach. So, like you said, they're going to have to be a little bit smarter about those reviews. I'm kind of like for anything that makes a call more accurate. I think that Jokic is kind of the victim of these quite often, where he gets like clearly slapped in the arm or sometimes the face, and then an out of bounds call might go against him. But I'm all for accuracy. I do think that this will maybe add some time to reviews, even though it's like something where if you're already reviewing it, like you see what happens, but they're going to take a little bit more time and like whatever. I'm not somebody that cares too much about how long NBA games are. Like that's not something that really bothers me right now, but I know it bothers a lot of other people just because of all of the stoppages of play. But that's the same with like every game that has rules and has officiating operates in some kind of spectrum of prioritizing game flow and like accuracy of calls. And, accuracy of calls is important for like safety and just like general enforcement of rules. And you just have to choose where to be somewhere on that spectrum. And there's always trade offs. So that was a recurrent fan complaint about officiating last year. And I don't mind talking about it, even though I don't like talking about officiating because it is like a specific thing about
Yeah.
how things are called. I don't really care too much to, complain about refs.
Can we just get rid of the rule where if someone knocks the ball out of a dribbler's hand, and because the ball was already in their hand and it's like sliding off of their pinky because the
No,
ball's in
they're
their
not going
hand
to do
and they
that.
hit it out and it's
They're not going
sliding
to do
off their
that.
hand and they overturn it because technically their hand was on the ball and they touched the
Yeah,
ball last. It's one of
because
the dumbest
it
rules
was
of all
out of bounds
time.
off of you. They would also get that would that's they're not going to do that because
They need
you
to.
also
It's
have
one of
those
the worst
instances
rules.
where it's not a specific rule. It's like it's just a strict interpretation of who
Yeah,
last touched the ball.
I know. They need to, like, the ball was clearly knocked out by the defender, but because they're like,
Right, but
well, they
you were
touched the
touching the
ball
ball.
last, it's so,
Yeah,
like,
they did.
close-minded. It's not the spirit of how the game works. It's just a
I
little
mean, isn't it
technicality.
though? If the spirit of the game is like gonna like if they're gonna want to reward physicality and defense and all of this stuff, right? You also have those plays like when someone saves the ball from going out of bounds and they're about to fall and they like hit it off of somebody.
Yeah.
Like that
Well,
play would
that's like a
also be
deliberate play, but this is like the offensive
yeah,
player
but
has
so is
no
knocking the ball
ability.
out of somebody's hands.
It's
That's the
already in
deliberate
their
play
hand, though.
too.
If you force the ball out of bounds, it should be out on you. It's like if you see it in fast
But you didn't
motion.
force the ball out of bounds if someone is about to like step out of bounds and they like throw it off of you. You didn't force it out of bounds in that instance either.
No, I'm saying I don't know how that's relevant. I'm just saying
Because
if
it's
you
the
knock
same
the ball,
rule. It's
if
the
you
same it's the interpretation of the same rule that is who last touched the ball before the ball got out of bounds.
I know it's the rule, but it's a shitty interpretation of the rule and they need to fix it. And
Okay.
like
I'm
just
just saying if you want to interpret it the way that you're saying, then that other instance, all this is what I'm talking about with like the spectrum of how and how officiating goes, how rules are interpreted, because you're going to have these edge cases like what you're talking about and what I'm talking about that have to fall under whatever the interpretation is. And there was a decision made that no, we're not going to get into all these edge cases about like, did this person intentionally like knock the ball out? What if you don't even touch the ball? What if it's, they have the hand as part of the ball rule that favors defense, right? Where you can slap somebody's hand and they hit like obviously the ball is going to be off of them in that instance, then you last touch the ball, like they never touched the ball or had possession of it. Do you favor that being out of bounds on the person who slapped the ball or slapped the hand of the
yeah.
person who?
If you like cause the ball to go out of bounds by your
So now
motion,
we're going into intention. That's going to take a lot more time
but
in
it's so
replay and
clear.
review.
It's not difficult. You can see the player
Okay, you're
swiping at
saying
it.
that, but
The
there are
ball
going to be edge
goes
cases
into
where
the
it's not
opposite
clear.
direction. That's proven
Okay.
by physics, by someone swiping their hand,
We're going to
and
have
it's
physics
going.
brought in. Okay.
Yeah. I'm just saying when you're dribbling and someone slaps at the ball, it's already in your hand and it's coming off of your hand because it was already in your hand. And you're going to be called as if you let the ball go out of bounds because you touched it last when the ball was
Well, you
already
should
in
have
your
been more
hand.
careful dribbling
The defender knocked the ball out of bounds, but they're going to
with
call it
its
out because they're going to
defense.
slow-mo frame by frame replay. Look at the ball going out of bounds. I hate that rule. It's the worst one in
All right.
basketball.
We're going to put this one up as a poll, everybody. The question
Of course,
is
everyone's going to be like, well, it is out of bounds on them. And I just think it's just like a
the
ridiculous
question
comeback.
is should the NBA change the interpretation of the out of bounds rules such that if a defender clearly knocks the ball out of somebody's hands and they're the reason that they're the cause of the ball going out of bounds, then should it be out of bounds off of the defender or should it be out of bounds off of the offensive player whose finger like barely brushes the ball?
Yeah.
How about that? That's the most generous wording that I could give you.
You know how like tie goes to the runner in baseball? I feel like this
Oh,
tie
baseball.
should
Oh
go
God.
to the
Will is
dribbler.
really upset if he's mentioning baseball. Anyway, I did not expect to go that deep into
Yes.
out of bounds rules in the NBA.
That's one of my passion projects.
Okay, so you must really, really appreciate this officiating change then. Let's move on to the main news item of this episode. Woj tweeted that Denver Nuggets star Jamal Murray agreed on his 4-year, $208 million maximum contract extension, mentioned all the agents, all the Woj things. So now Jamal is going to be locked up for the next 5 seasons. My understanding of this deal is that it is 4 years fully guaranteed. There are no options, team option or player option. The Nuggets haven't officially announced this deal, so we don't technically know the details or any potential, stipulations that might be in the contract. But from all reporting, it doesn't sound like there are any. So I find the timing of this to be interesting if the Nuggets weren't going to get any concessions, I guess, on Jamal's part. But it's here. We got the max extension done. Will, what is your reaction to this?
I'm very happy. It was fun for a bit to speculate on why the extension wasn't coming. The extension coming now, there can still be more speculation because we can talk about that. But ultimately, I just wanted a deal to be done. I think most of the time, locking up your best players is a very good thing. You don't want them to necessarily hit free agency, which is becoming less and less common now. But even back in the day, it's kind of like the reason why we lost KCP, right? He's a free agent. People can offer him a big contract. You want to extend them and keep them. The only downside that people are bringing up is they're kind of low on Jamal right now. And so they don't know that giving him a max like this is necessarily the most responsible thing. I think he deserves it. I think the Nuggets should give it to him, look like an organization who is professional and treats their stars with respect. Not that all the concerns are like irrational or anything, because he does have too many soft tissue injuries for everyone's liking. How do you feel about it?
I was just happy that the deal was finally done, honestly. Like you said, like the Nuggets behaving like an organization that's professional, although I look at it a little bit differently than you. Treating players with respect, great. Like, love that. But I think that really it was more about the downside of not doing this, like going into training camp with everybody getting questions every single day about Jamal and his maximum extension, potentially going into the season with everybody uh, getting questions about Jamal and his
Mm-hmm.
potential max extension. And
Him
I'm
maybe
sure
being
that they wanted to
frustrated.
get this done before Jokic got back to Denver because he does not want to answer press questions about anything, let alone this, about money in the NBA and like all of that. So I actually think that the team had um, a more expedited like deadline on this than maybe even people thought about. I saw some people that were like, let's just see how Jamal looks in preseason before we hand over this deal and all that. And like, guys, front office does not want to have to answer to Jokic about why he has to keep getting these questions because they still haven't gotten this deal done. I'm sure. Because like, what does Jokic aim for than
Mm-hmm.
having to answer dumb questions from NBA media on the concerns? Like, I get it. I don't actually care. Like, the number is the number. Like, that's just how much money NBA players, NBA stars in particular, are making these days. But I do understand the concerns about what it means for the team's, roster building future, if there is one, because next season, in all likelihood, should they keep AG, they will be a second apron team. So then the concern becomes like, are they going to let AG go because they don't want to be a second apron team? And that's because of Jamal's deal, like kind of putting them over the top there. The other thing that I don't actually remember if I've brought up on the show before is that I don't think that they would work to um, extend Aaron Gordon before they got Jamal's deal done. Just order of operations, right? You want to get your star players, your most important players, your most expensive players really out of the way first, usually, unless you're the Philadelphia 76ers. So role players are going to have to wait. AG becomes extension eligible on September 27th. If they hadn't gotten this deal with Jamal done, especially going into the season, because I'm pretty sure AG cannot sign an extension once the regular season starts, then I would have doubted highly that they got a deal done. And then we would have gone through the whole rigmarole of wondering, will he stay or will he go when we get to the off season next year? And I do not want to go through that again, especially with a piece that is so key and integral as AG. So I'm really hoping now this puts a clock on the front office to me starting on September 27th to get an extension done with AG so that I know what the hell they're doing next summer, right? A lot of people talked in the championship season about how important it was that everybody on the team was rowing in the same direction. Everybody had gotten paid. They had extended KCP almost immediately after that trade had happened. Jokic had signed his supermax that previous summer. Bruce and Jeff were the only guys that were potentially not being locked up. So we definitely want to make sure that everybody in the starting lineup minimum is good to go. And our bench, we have guys like Russ and Dario that their contract situations just are what they are because of the fact that they're minimum and taxpayer Emily players. But when it comes to the starters, you definitely just want everybody locked up so that that's not a question. Just take that off the table because we have so many other questions about this team that need to be answered this year, and you just don't want this distraction there, both on an individual player level and on a team-wide level at all.
The distraction element is important, and I am glad that's over. And even though, I mean, they could offer the extension and still have reservations or things that they want Jamal to prove this season. All fans have that because we want Jamal to be the Jamal that we know that he can be. So the consistency is a question. The injuries are a question. I was wondering if you think that calling Jamal injury prone at this point is fair. Like, would you say Jamal is an injury prone player?
I think that's fair because somebody that tore their ACL, if they had no other issues having gone on in their career, I don't necessarily think that that's fair to call them injury prone. But although these lower leg injuries, they just tend to come in clusters sometimes. You just tend to be a little bit more susceptible to things sometimes after that injury. But even before the ACL, Jamal dealt with like little nicks and things all the time. One of the things I actually wanted to look up was, regardless of what you think about how Jamal ranks compared to these guys, he's going to be getting paid comparable to guys like Donovan Mitchell and Devin Booker. And Jamal has definitely, I looked at the last 4 seasons, and even if you took out the ACL season, he's played on average 57 games per season. Donovan has only played 60, which was interesting over the last 4 years. And then Booker has only played 64 games per season. So all of them are under the 65 game threshold on average for the last 4 seasons, which is not great. It's just interesting that those, 3 guards that are making max money with these inconsistent injury histories, Jamal being the worst of them, obviously, even if you take out the year that he missed with the ACL. I do think that it's fair to, at this point, at least consider them injury prone, but there's obviously a spectrum of that. Like, this isn't Embiid, nor does he provide the production that Embiid does in the regular season either. This isn't, and the thing is, they tend to be all things that you unfortunately classify as kind of coming in clusters or being related to each other. These lower leg injuries, they tend to compound just because of things that you're doing to compensate because of one could make you more susceptible to another. We saw that last year. He had obviously the hamstring at the beginning of the season. At some point, he was dealing with bilateral ankle sprains, which was just like, okay, he's got both ankle sprains. Then he had the shin splints. Then he had the ankle things again. And then in the playoffs, obviously, he had the calf strain. So it was just like the lower leg season not from hell, because obviously it could have been a much more severe injury, such as the one that kept him out for an entire season in 2021 to 2022. Do you disagree with someone saying like, hey, like injury prone? I think that that's just kind of the reality of how his regular seasons have gone, even if you take out the ACL season. But I can understand someone also wanting to include that because it's like that did happen.
I don't disagree. Like I guess I just didn't really know where I stood on that because I had heard some people saying like Jamal's injury prone, and I was like, oh, is this just like an accepted like fact about him now? And
I think last season really kind of solidified it, right?
yeah, I guess so. But I thought, was the timing of his ACL part of it? Because it was like the worst possible time because he missed 2 postseasons because of that, right? Whereas like if it was at the beginning of one season, he might have only missed 1. And I think kind of compounded the baggage around that injury because it was like 2 postseasons that he missed. But also, yeah, last season, then he had the ankle. And
the year before the ACL, it was a shortened season, but he only played 48 games. That year, Donovan Mitchell played 53 and Booker played 67.
Sometimes players are either not conditioned enough or strong enough, or they added too much weight to their body that, all this jumping and landing, is just taking a toll on the body, like that with the Embiids and the Zions of the world.
Yeah, all that
Jamal
jumping that Embiid is doing. It's more like falling, like he's just falling
falling.
on his own.
But it's also like it's a conversation topic with AD. Like, is he too heavy, and that's why he's sustaining these injuries?
But
Sometimes it
like
is
bigs are
just
also like particularly susceptible to these ankle injuries for all the not ankle but joint injuries because of those very reasons, because
mhm,
you're putting more pressure on your joints and more weight on your joints on a consistent basis. And then you
yeah.
obviously have like the big events that could cause like an acute injury as opposed to things that kind of build up over time also.
But then there was the where do you want to use for excuse or just season lesson in hindsight of playing the starters too much? Maybe the stagger lineups with Jamal like riding him to
But
the bench
Jamal
a lot was
missed
too
but
much
Jamal played the least of any of the starters.
because he was just in terms of games played.
Games played, like obviously minutes. I mean, minutes per game, he's on par with all the other guys. I think it was probably like AG maybe played the least minutes per game, which I agree. Like, I think that's how it should be. I mean, people make a whole thing about like the minutes that the starters played and like the staggers and things like that. That's more of an issue late in the season. Jamal was having these issues early in the season
Right.
when
Yeah.
starters are across the league are playing 32 to 34 minutes per game. This wasn't the late season stuff happened, obviously, like we talked about the shin splints and then obviously the calf strain later when guys are playing 38, 39, 40 minutes per game. But even early in the season, when he has the hamstring, they're only playing 32 to 34 minutes per game, depending on the game.
I think sometimes I ask myself when someone's labeled injury prone if it's related to it being like their fault, like whether it's there's something inherently about their body that's off, their tissues are softer, their bones are weaker, or if it's like a stylistic choice in how they play that leads to it, or if it's an off-season issue with them not doing enough due diligence to like protect themselves going into the season. At the end of the day, there's only so much you can control. Sometimes a dude's gonna fall into your leg and like blow your knee out. Like sometimes it's gonna happen. I think some players are allowed to have like a
Or sometimes
significant
you're going to fall into somebody else and blow your knee out.
hint. Yeah. I sometimes don't even know what injury prone means. Is it if it's
It
just
means
like
you get
this?
injuries. Like, I think that there is a connotation of it's kind of their fault sometimes, but other times, like, you could look at a Kawhi Leonard and be like, he's not the cause of his injuries. Like, he's a well-conditioned guy. Maybe some people think like, oh, you don't play enough games, and maybe that's why your body's not, whatever. But also, the reason that they started load managing him in the first place was because he was getting injured. So it's like nothing seems to work. He got hurt last year despite playing like a record number of games for the last 5 years of his career. Like, I think sometimes there is like again, sometimes it is a connotation of like it's their fault because of like a play style thing or whatever. But other times it's like this person's body is just like is what it is. This is something that I talked about when we first got the news of okay, this max contract extension is going to happen with Jamal, and then we were waiting for like a week or two, and it was getting into like okay, we're like a couple weeks into free agency now, and we still haven't heard the official news, right? If Jamal is going to be like missing time, because that's really what we're talking about here, right? For the most
Yeah.
part, except in the playoffs where he did play despite being injured, like when he's on the floor, he's fine, like he's good, right? We wish that maybe he'd like level up a little bit more. And clearly he's like working himself into shape during the regular season, but whatever. Like he's making an obvious impact, positive impact on the floor when he's on the floor in the regular season. But we're talking about the missing games. And one of the things I mentioned was just like, we have to be honest about the state that, like, what is reasonable to expect from Jamal and Jamal's body, frankly, at this stage. Like if he is going to be quote unquote injury prone, we have to like um factor in a certain number of missed games per year because that's going to affect how we build the roster. If that's the case, this was mostly as part of a discussion about like should it be a full max. I don't think that like offering less than a full max would have been quote unquote disrespectful to the player. It might have pissed him off anyway, but it would have been potentially I think arguably a recognition of the reality of like we have to build our roster differently because you miss X number of games. So we need to like, I don't know, go out and get like another scoring guard and whatever at a high level because we have to factor that in. And that's just a fact of how this is, especially under the new CBA where the second apron, it seems many teams are treating it as effectively a hard cap.
I'm just kind of going in on the injury aspects of it because that is the big question about Jamal. I guess I didn't fully subscribe to the he's injury prone and that's just the reality of him as a player because all the injuries were understandable to me. Like even
But
if
they
you
happened.
even if
right?
yeah, that's what I was going to say. Even if you can explain away every injury, like the amount of them is going to, label you as an injury prone player. The narrative that we've been given is that he had a kind of championship hangover offseason, maybe didn't do enough conditioning or whatever.
It seemed
Came
like he
into
had the
this,
same kind of off season that he's been having, frankly,
yeah, and
from
just
all
kind of
accounts.
coming into the season, trying to play himself into shape or something and peak at the right time. That was always the narrative. That's what the coaches and even Calvin Booth said, that they wished he did some more things in the offseason. Maybe do you think that they saw enough from him from coming in and working out and whatever and them evaluating his health? Did they get some piece of info that made them feel like it was time to pull the trigger on it? Or was it just always they were going to just do this no matter what?
I think they were going to do this. I think they were going to do it before training camp. The timing of it, I think, is interesting because someone pointed out that this came like the day after all of those reports about the discord between Malone and the front office, as if that was news because it wasn't new what, Zach Lowe and them were talking about this week. Because it's something that we've been talking about all of last season, really, and beyond, because they're like, Malone doesn't want to play young guys, and Calvin Booth wants to develop young guys, and Malone's trying to win a championship, and all of this stuff. Whatever. That wasn't new, but it was being talked about. And then the next day, we get this news. And I thought it was interesting. I don't know how much this team likes to react to external media reports. Like, by all accounts, for the most part, this isn't something that happens. Like, no, it's not like anyone's like come out. It's not like Malone's like doing interviews being like, no, Calvin Booth and I are totally copacetic or anything like that. But we get the Jamal extension. And you and I talked about the day that the original Shams report came out that they were working on this max extension. It was the day 2 of the draft. It was also the day that KCP opted out of his player option, signaling that he was going to be entering free agency, and the day that they salary dumped Reggie Jackson. And the Jamal news was kind of sandwiched in between those things. And I'm like, oh, something good. And I'm like, was that intentional? I don't know, because I couldn't tell if that information was coming from the team or from the player, but it did come out. Yeah, I don't know. I think I find the timing interesting just from that perspective, from the PR management perspective, because they do still have a couple weeks left until training camp. You don't want to leave it till like the day before because you're still going to get questions about it, and he's going to get questions about it anyway. Everyone's going to be like, "Oh, like, are you happy for Jamal like signing this max extension? Like the organization is reaffirming their investment, their commitment to Jamal and like all of this stuff." It's more, but it would be more probably the questions will be more in the vein of like fluff as opposed to so like what's going on with this team? Is everybody like rowing in the same direction? Like what's going on with this team next year? Are you guys working on the extension? Because obviously Jamal is a player that would have been eligible to sign his extension even going into the regular season. I have to decide I have to find out how they decide that rule, like why certain players can sign their extensions in season and some can't. But yeah, I think it's interesting, and I do think that the injury angle is the main thing because when he's on the floor, Jamal can be incredibly impactful. Obviously, especially on offense.
There's an idea that players play through injuries a lot, like all players play through injuries and still play well. And there's stories and accounts of that. But I don't think it should be underestimated how impactful an injury can be to a professional athlete who is playing in an insanely competitive league where you are used to having full like control of your body and what you are capable of, and then when all of a sudden there is a part of you that is not firing, it's affecting your shot and how explosive you can be off the dribble and maybe catching you off guard when you're thinking I can do these things, and then all of a sudden you're not able to. I do think it is one of those things where there's a handful or more of players in the NBA whose contracts actually properly reflect the value of them as a player. Maybe this max is a little over what Jamal's doing because of the inconsistencies and all that, but it's like appropriate to me for the Nuggets, like in a vacuum.
Absolutely, because the alternative is a complete garbage plan. That's something that I think is an underestimated part of the calculus, and why I thought this would always get done and should have always gotten done, like regardless of how badly he played in the playoffs and in the Olympics, is that if we won, losing Jamal in free agency would be just a complete disaster. Like if he walked for nothing, let's say if he went to, I don't know, Brooklyn, who's going to have a bunch of cap space next year or something, we would not get that salary slot back. We're not going to be able to just sign another max player. That's not how it works when you're a team that is already over the salary cap. You're able to extend your own guys, but getting in new players is very difficult. If they would have gone through this entire season not knowing what Jamal's situation was going to be, and it would have loomed over the team like the darkest of clouds, because of the constant questioning that they would have gotten about it, and obviously the knowledge of like, we don't know what's going to happen to this core at the end of this year, right? Because it would have also spelled uncertainty for AG, right? If they're willing to let Jamal go, then like, what's the plan for keeping our, third or fourth most important player? And then obviously would have pissed off Jokic on top of that. And, we have all these young players that, need to be developing around a more stable core, if you will. And yeah, it would have been all bad stuff. I'm not saying that it's going to be all good stuff moving forward, because Jamal still has to like show up. And it isn't just health questions, because he isn't as consistent in the regular season as he, has been in the playoffs, despite the positive impact that he still manages to bring to the floor. If he can build off of the kind of, the averages that he was building off of in the regular season last year, I think that would be good, but perhaps not enough now that we have, lost another key player in KCP, and we have more young players that need to develop around, like I said, a stable core. Like having a more consistent point guard would probably help with that too. The team is clearly demanding a lot of Jamal now, because with the max extension comes expectations. And like you said, you hope that he is able to show up, do the work, and, live up to those things, because he's entirely capable of it. Like we've seen it from him.
Let's look at the Jamal that we're all talking about.
We're calling this segment Nuggets Rewind. What we think are their best or one of their best games from the regular season last year.
We're going to look at some of the Nuggets players, not all, throughout these upcoming episodes, since we started this show in the playoffs, so we didn't actually get to talk about any regular season games. And it might be fun to go back and just remind everyone that the Nuggets are still good.
You and I settled on the Boston Celtics game in Boston for Jamal. So the Nuggets won this 102-100. My first impression watching this game back yesterday was like, it was a cleansing experience, frankly, watching the Nuggets play winning basketball again.
I'm glad that it cheered you up a bit.
It did. And like, I didn't even realize that I needed it, because I've been like pretty upbeat.
Yeah, you seem fine, yeah.
Yeah. Grace has been incredibly depressed. No, I've been fine, but I watched it and I'm like, oh my gosh, I remember when my team played good basketball and it made me happy. This game was a Jokic masterclass. We're going to talk about Jamal some in depth, but my gosh, like Jokic just had some like ridiculous, like he was in his bag in this game too. I remember the narrative coming out of this game where, the Nuggets took down the Celtics. They had been undefeated at home to that point. I think they were 20-0 going into that game. And the Nuggets were on a 5-game road trip. It was coming off of the loss at Philly that was kind of a really like left a bad taste in everyone's mouths, because it was like they should have won that game. Like they were up late, and like Jamal in particular like struggled at the end. Like Pat Bev was like, I think they forced a turnover on him, and like Batum was blocking him. It was like dumb shit at the end of the game, basically, that lost it. Again, part of a road trip. They go into Boston. I was like, this is an L. Like, I thought
Yeah.
this is going to be a scheduled L, like whatever. They'll go and maybe they'll beat the Knicks, or maybe they'll be on a 3-game losing streak or something after this. And then they'll just have to win some more games at home. But they went into that building and they were determined to win that game. That was the narrative coming out of the game. But rewatching it, it did start off kind of like, okay, you guys were like being sloppy. Like this felt like a championship hangover game to start, especially on defense in the first half of the game. Second half of the game, both sides tightened up, but like
Yeah.
the offense was pretty good most of the game.
I felt like the Celtics defense also was not as intense as they could be in the first like half and all that too, and tightened up like and got more intense later on.
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah, the Nuggets won that game and gave the Celtics their first home loss of the season. I don't know if it would be like up there for one of Jokic's best game of the season. Like I wouldn't be surprised.
Oh my God, he had so many great games.
But I don't know that will.
I don't even think it's top 5.
Okay.
To be honest, like especially because we played the Warriors like 4 times last year, so like all of those will be up there.
And
the
like
Lakers.
we were looking at some other games. Jamal had 35 points against the Spurs back in the day. In April, he had a 37-point game versus Utah on March 9th. He had a 32-point game versus Sacramento, a 37-point game versus Detroit. So as you can see with some of these teams I'm naming, they're not as formidable as someone like the Celtics, say, for example. I also think the Celtics game was more like of a playoff atmosphere than most regular season games.
Yeah, I think that especially officiating wise, I took issue with like some calls here or there, but not many calls were going to both teams. So that was a thing. I think even though the defense wasn't super tight in the first half, I think both teams were relatively disciplined, if that makes sense. So like it wasn't intense in the first half for either team, but everyone was pretty disciplined. I think on both sides of the ball, like there wasn't a lot of like, what the hell was that shot kind of things going on, or like how did you get lost off ball and like lose that shoot? Like that wasn't really happening. It was more just like positional things like that. So that was interesting, but these were also, I think, the 2 best teams in the league at this point. I don't remember if the Nuggets were the 1 seed going into this game. I think Minnesota was maybe leading in the Western standings at that point. But these were the 2 teams that everybody expected to make it to the finals. Let me see. I had a couple of other notes just on like other Nuggets in this game. I thought Peyton Watson, like defensively, clearly very impactful. Offensively, looked like a baby giraffe.
He did hit 1 3 off of the Jamal assist. That was cool, but yeah, otherwise
that was the he blocks Jalen Brown. They go down in transition, and ball ends up in Jamal's hands. He drives and then swing over to Peyton for the above the break 3. It was kind of on trailing. It was kind of a transition play. It was very nice. It was like, yes, basketball gods rewarding good defense kind of thing. But both teams, as I've pointed out, tightened their rotations in the second half of this game. I think AG played the entire second half. I think Christian didn't play in the second half. Peyton Pritchard didn't play in the second half. At one point, it was interesting. Boston was trying to find solutions, because Mazzulla goes to a double big lineup of Kristaps and Luke Cornett front court with Tatum playing the 3. It was interesting watching the Nuggets small lineup just kind of carve that up. They were even rebounding pretty well, defensively and that sort of thing. And we did see in the next meeting that the teams have that Mazzulla goes to a double big bench with, at that point, it was Xavier Tillman and Al Horford to try to counter the Nuggets bench. And they were just grabbing offensive rebounds, just gobbling those things up, which was an interesting strategy that I haven't seen too many teams employ against the Nuggets bench. They were playing Cornette and Kristaps together, I think only in the second half is when I noticed that. So that was just interesting. It was clear they were trying to find some answers, which was interesting because the game was close the entire time. It's not like the Nuggets or the Celtics were ever really running away with it at any point, except for one dumb run where the Nuggets just kept turning the ball over, I think in the second quarter before they I think the Celtics had a 12-point lead at one point, but the Nuggets were able to claw back, keep it close at half.
Some rebounding struggles for the Nuggets. They had that
In the first half, in particular,
infamous
yeah.
sequence. I think it was going around social media where the Nuggets just couldn't get a rebound on the same possession.
Yeah.
It was just one after the other after the
It
other.
was like 4 offensive rebounds on the same possession, and the Celtics didn't score on that possession, I'm pretty sure. It was really,
Yeah,
like
it's pretty funny. Thinking back to that game and thinking it was one of the Nuggets' better played games, which is obviously you can think that because it's the Celtics at home, which is very tough, and you won. So clearly you did something well as a team. But when I was watching it back, I was thinking, wow, so many of these players could have done much better. I mean, you have Jokic had 34 points, Jamal had 35 points, so huge production out of them. Mike had 13, which kind of surprised me just watching
that
the
it
game
was
back.
low.
That it was low, but I thought maybe even was going to be lower than that
Yeah,
because,
I'm surprised at the number 13 too, because my main note on MPJ was how much he struggled with Derek White just separating from him off ball. And even once he would get the ball, like Derek White was always like poking the ball away. Like Mike needs to be stronger with the ball. One of the things I really want to see from him next year is getting ready to have more momentum so that he can drive off the catch. Like they can catch him. He tends to be really effective when like he's coming off of a pin down and they're usually trying to run him off the line, and he drives off the catch because he is so big. But when he kind of like stops and like takes his time, or when uh, there was like one possession where he tries to like seal for a post up, in kind of like a static position as opposed to on the move. A really good defender like Derek White, even though he's smaller, those smaller defenders can really be quite pesky for you if you're not like a power
yeah.
player. If you're bigger, if you're not able to weaponize that size and that strength advantage, then it can be a problem. There was like one bad play like that, and then on like the next possession, he drives in for a dunk. And it
hmm
was like, oh, yeah, exactly. It was like an and one dunk, too.
Jamal, I think, would have had 10 assists, or Mike had a really good like cut, or he was curling off a screen, or he was just like flashing to the ball. Like there was a couple set plays where it
Yeah.
was
He
set.
was moving off ball well, like, he would
Yeah.
get in position, but, like, losing the ball once he got
Yeah.
it
Or
was,
like we
like
would throw it entry to him and it would just like bounce off his hands or he'd get it and lose it. And like, so like a couple opportunities where he was just turning the ball over and losing it and could have been much easier for him. But yeah, he had the dunk. He had 1-3. He had a couple free throws. But Aaron Gordon was 0 for 6, 0 for 3 from 3. A lot of times left wide open in the corner, missed every single one. KCP, 5
sure did.
points, not a ton of attempts, but just
Yeah, this was
not really
also,
in it.
like, KCP had the big stop on Tatum at the end, but I thought really on both ends of the floor, it was not a good KCP
Yeah,
game,
I
because
agree.
for the most part, Tatum was like, "Oh, I'll just bully this guy."
And
Um, but then as soon as Tatum starts playing like a wing again, like KCP's got his number because the ball denial's really good and Tatum wants to like get into his dribble combinations and KCP's like, no, you're not gonna do that on me and all that. But like he was mostly pretty effective in the post, even though on that game saving stop at the end, that's what Tatum, I guess, was trying to do. But even on that possession, like KCP forces him further out, and because of the aggressive ball denial, like makes the catch a little more uncomfortable, and then Tatum like freaks out and
yeah, that was the
all that
big
stuff.
play by KCP where he
Right.
made up
But
for the
for the
game.
most part in this game, I didn't really feel his impact. Like there were a bunch of shots. There was like one big three that he does make. I think that gives the Nuggets the lead. They do give up the lead later, but in the late third quarter, because like I said, it was a back and forth game. But there were a lot of other shots where I'm like, oh yeah, KCP is gonna make like that. Like you just know it's going in, but then it didn't go in,
hmm
except for that shot. I actually don't remember others that I think he had the first bucket of the game for the Nuggets. That was for sure because the
Yeah,
Celtics were kind of
it
scoring,
was.
getting easy buckets, and then he had that mid-range. Yeah. I'm gonna miss that shot, as even inconsistent as it
I
was
know.
last season.
It's something that they always could go to. Yeah, the reason why I like that we're going through all these other players, even though this is a Jamal segment, is that I'm trying to show how not
Ugly.
effective some of the other players
Yeah.
were, and Jamal had to
Yeah.
really carry a lot. Jokic obviously kind of closed and sealed the deal, I think, on offense in this game. There was a lot of 1v1 post ups on Porzingis or times where they had a double and he found someone open for three, including
Horford.
Jamal. lots of stuff like that. Jokic doing his thing. Obviously, Jokic is going to have his fingerprints all over any Nuggets game. This is just like a special Jamal game with this tough shot making.
This game was about the duo, right? But Jamal was even, we're going to talk about how Jamal was effective even with Jokic off the floor. But that was the other bullet point, big thing, big takeaway about the narrative at the time, like coming out of that game was like, Jokic and Jamal just outplayed Tatum and Brown pretty decisively because they really struggled in this game. Tatum was like 37% from the field or something on like 24 shot attempts. I'm like, wait, what? It didn't even look that bad when I was watching the game. Like it's funny like going back and looking at the stats after you rewatch the game because you're like, man, this was even worse than it looked, and it didn't look great.
I think Derek White like could arguably was the best Celtic in that game. 24 points.
Yeah,
leading
you could
scorer.
say like first half it was Kristaps, but he like completely disappeared in the second half of that game. It was crazy. Like I think he had like 15 points in the first quarter, and then like I barely noticed him the entire rest of the game.
Yeah, and you'll see in we'll look at some clips for people watching right now. Like Jamal had a lot of a couple free drives because either Porzingis or Horford were in drop and were very worried about Jokic's role and just sticking to him, and Jamal just went right by them and got an easy layup. That happened a couple times. So
this is the same coverage that the Wolves were employing, though.
Yeah.
And Jamal was not in a physical state, I guess,
to punish.
if I'm being generous, to punish that. But it was like, this is exactly what we've been needing from you in that Wolves series. But let's jump over to the Jamal clips now that we've talked about everybody else in this game.
Right.
So 35 points, incredibly efficient game for Jamal, like you see here, 3 of 7 from 3. 8 rebounds. Like Celtics really need to be kicking themselves for that. A couple of them were offensive rebounds too. 5 assists. He could have had even more. But like you said, like the shooting from the role players in this game was really quite rough. The Celtics actually made 6 more threes, I believe, than the Nuggets in this game. But we were killing them in the paint and from 2. And Jamal's mid-range shooting was a big part of that. If you go to, he has this transition drive.
Yeah, so it's
so they get the rebound and he's just like, okay, we're pushing now. Look, he's like, oh, I'm faster than Derek White. And then, oh, look at that reverse layup. I think that should have a different name, but in the tracking data, it's like as it's just put in as a reverse layup. But this is one of those, like you can hear the caller going like, Jamal with the jelly. Like,
yeah,
it kind of like echoing in my head. I was like, this was nasty. Like,
yeah, that was a good one.
He was really feeling himself in this game. Obviously making a couple of the catch and shoot threes that we've seen.
Right. Yeah, there were some times where I thought Jalen Brown could have done better. Like he would just lose him.
There's that play you were talking about where Horford's in drop.
Yeah, and he's just like,
they're like, oh no, I'm going to stick to Jokic on this roll.
Not stopping Jamal at all. Just letting him in there. And that, it kind of worked on a previous play where they were playing that drop and kind of Murray just didn't punish it enough and tried to get it back to Jokic, and Al Horford was right in position to just be right there. And I think Jamal after that was like, all right, I'm not going to do that anymore. And just trusted it, and it was open for him every time. He also had 2 early fouls in the game, came out early in the first quarter. So I think it's even more impressive that he kind of finished with this stat line after coming out early with 2 fouls. And he even fouled later in the game too, because he was playing pretty aggressive. Like he was trying to disrupt entry passes when the Celtics were trying to get mismatched post-ups on him. He was successful some of the times, like he got a block on Jrue. He was playing aggressive and physical in that game and was able to stay in it and close the game out. He had a huge second quarter, though. He had a 7-point, like just straight 7-point run. On
his own, yeah.
On his own in the second where, they would go to this kind of mismatch. AG, like Pritchard, like we were abusing Pritchard, whether it was Jamal or AG or anybody.
The Celtics looked so small in this game. It was really... that was interesting. Like, despite the, struggles by some of the other Nuggets, like, and even the rebounding issues in the first half, there were just some plays where I'm like, why did they look so small? Like, you're looking at this lineup here, and Cornette's on the floor. I don't even notice him because they've got him, like, off guarding somebody in the corner, or sometimes on offense, they've got him standing in the corner as if that's gonna be effective. And then they've basically got Tatum, like, doing all the screening and, like, doing 5 stuff, right?
Yeah.
They've effectively got Tatum playing the 5 even with Cornette on the floor, which I find, interesting. Obviously, you wanna keep your best player involved in all of the action.
Yeah, what did you think of Tatum on Jamal? Because
Oh, no. Like, no, can't guard
okay.
him. Look at
Yeah.
so this right here, like, Tatum was, like, falling asleep, like, on the ball. I think that Tatum is I don't want Tatum switching off onto, like, the best guards in the NBA. He can switch off onto, like, mid guards and,
Hmm.
like, bad ones, obviously, because he does have good foot speed and all of that, but he really is a power forward, like,
Yeah.
it's one of those things, like, I watched this game and thought, "Okay, AG is actually the most versatile defender in the NBA." 'Cause I've heard, like, that being a thing that people, brought up, as a discussion. And it's like, "Oh, is AG in that conversation? I think it's Jason Tatum, blah, blah, blah." And I'm like, "Oh, no, AG's way more, like, disciplined, at least in these interactions, whether he's gonna get scored on or not." Because watch Tatum here, if you play this, totally falls asleep. Jamal's like, just gets him with a hezzy
Yeah,
and then
Jamal
gets
is
wide
wide open
open.
as he's going into the
Jamal's
shot.
great also. I do want to point that I don't think that Tatum is, like, bad here, but it's just like this is not where he can make a positive impact as a
Hmm.
defender.
I thought Jamal, like,
Um,
that was off a rejected screen where he just went to a step
yeah.
back three and hit the shot. He had some really good rejected screens that, whether
Yes.
he went to a step back or just created rim pressure, was really good. I mean, this next play, he's just ISOing Pritchard and just packing him down and getting the fadeaway. One thing I did think, though, speaking of those kinds of shots and just like getting to a pull up or like an ISO or fadeaway, is these are tough shots. And a lot of the times, Jamal in the Lakers series during the championship run has people like Jason Timm saying he's one of the best tough shot makers in the league. Now people aren't really thinking of him in that way necessarily because he didn't have as great of a playoffs. It's like, how sustainable is that style? And I think that style does explain a lot of the statistics around Jamal and the discussion. And yeah,
Yeah, I
this
mean,
is kind of what we live with.
we talked about this before the playoffs, right? Where
Yeah.
it's like what makes Jamal different than, these other high level guards that are perhaps more consistent. Like they have a go-to, they have like some particular, not just a go-to shot, but like a go-to athletic trade that they happen to be exploiting to get to that shot. And Jamal relies, especially now, like post ACL, where he doesn't have quite the same level of burst as he did before, almost exclusively on craft and coming off of screens and all of that. My thing with that though is like he is so good at it. That's the thing, is like his go-to is this mid-range area, but he gets to it in so many different
Yeah.
ways. If you could actually, but I want to get back to the craft. If you could fast forward to, it's in the third quarter around right here. Okay. So he's coming off the screen. This is another example of that same play. So Kristaps is playing drop, and they end up um, playing, like, basically sticking to Jokic, giving him a free reign. But then Jrue comes over to help, right? So they're like, okay, we need to revise this coverage. And Jamal is just so creative with how he's
Mm,
going to attempt that shot. So then he ends up doing the finger roll instead of just a scoop layup, right?
yeah.
And
He
look,
like
like, I mean, look at this,
goes back into his left hand, kind of then back to the right around Drew, and then just lays it off the
right?
glass.
I kind of liken him to almost a Kyrie Irving, although Kyrie Irving has, I think, more dribble combinations. Like I would say that he's a superior ball handler to Jamal because he can also create separation with his ball handling. Like, but those are two players that don't really have like the best athletic tools. Jamal has a bit more size, obviously, and he does still have some burst. Like we talked about some of the block shots that he can get that rely more on their craftiness and moving off the ball. There were several instances in this game where he's like, "Oh, I can easily shed Derek White off ball." Like Derek White just couldn't stay with him. So then they end up just being like, "Okay, Derek White, you just go on to MPJ, like whatever." Right? This is what happened in the Wolves series, is that Ant couldn't stay with Jamal off the ball, or Jaden couldn't stay with Jamal off the ball. Jamal couldn't be off ball as much in that series. So they could just put Ant on him on the ball, and it was harder for Jamal to shed him that way.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because I saw some off-ball like kind of screens where they were trying to get Derek White switched onto Jamal, and I was like, that's kind of interesting because Derek White, you think he's a really good defender and all that, but yeah, you make a good point
there were other points where Jamal's just like bullying Derek White also. So like on the ball, he was unbothered by Derek White.
Yeah.
That was really nice to see, actually. I was like, oh yeah, like he can actually completely outsmart even like the best defenders in the NBA. And that's the thing with this game that really stands out to me. Like he might have had more points in other games, but the Celtics have so many good defenders, and you see Jamal cook every single one of them at different points in this game. And he was so unbothered. Like he was incredibly efficient in this game. These were tough shots, but by like just general NBA standards, but they weren't actually like tough shots for Jamal. Like sometimes Jamal takes these shots where I'm just like, literally that was luck that went in.
Yeah, but you're gonna get some of those.
These were like shots that I want to see Jamal just generally be more efficient on, because he can make them, and he did in this game. These like short mid-range jump shots, posting up a smaller player when it comes to like a Peyton Pritchard. He posted up Jrue in this game and got to a baseline midi. Posted up Derek White at different points in this game. He was driving to the basket, coming off of screens, whether it was with Jokic as the pick and roll partner or AG as the pick and roll partner. Yeah, I could go on, so why don't you go?
I mean, there was even some missed shots. He was wide open, like for three, and missed them, which was unfortunate. It's going to happen, but like, coming off a double drag and Al Horford trying to scram switch off, and then he's open and takes it and missed it.
Yes. But he takes it, right? Like he's sometimes hesitant with those shots, which kind of pisses me off because he can be so efficient from three. I'm glad that he took them in this game. 7 attempts is not like high volume or anything, but this was a very low paced game. I believe it was 87 possessions. That would rank like dead last in the NBA if that was the average number of possessions in a game. Like it would be dead last by a mile. So 7 3-point attempts actually like pretty good, I think, in that context. Just for the audience's for context for the audience, the Nuggets are not like a super high paced team themselves. They average a little over 97 possessions per game. So an 87 possession game is incredibly slow. Both the Celtics and the Nuggets decided to like really strangle pace in this game, and it was a really big part of this game was who plays better half court basketball. I did have a comment on that actually, because even though it was a low pace game for the most part, it seemed like there were more instances where the Celtics were willing to punish in transition and push pace when say the Nuggets were not like already set up in the half court on the other end.
Yeah.
Pretty more often, and it seemed like Brown and Tatum did it by driving in transition. Derek White and Jrue Holiday did it usually by getting the ball up the floor as quickly as possible.
Even off made baskets, they were trying to do that.
Even off made baskets, absolutely. And I think that's something that I think the Celtics don't normally play at the slow pace that they did in this game overall against the Nuggets. So I think that's more indicative of what they do against most teams most of the time. And I do wonder, after the Nuggets were ranked 27th in pace in the NBA last season, are they going to start playing a little bit faster next year? Especially with, Russell Westbrook on the team now. Maybe Peyton Watson's going to be doing more ball handling, like just grab and goes and like pushing in transition or getting the ball up the floor faster in particular is a way that they could do that without changing too much of how they actually play, just because it would just give them more time to run their offense compared to, how they did last.
It's just reminding me of KCP like struggling in his transition finishing, which I'm not trying to look for the bad of KCP now that he's not on the team, but I did notice it was kind of a rough game for him. And
we talked about this when he was still on the team. Like this was a running meme where it's like I just assume that's a missed. A KCP transition layup is going to be a miss. If he makes it, like the other team has to be so sad.
And CB will have to work on transition finishing, but I would say like with CB and PWat and Aaron Gordon, Russell Westbrook, and stuff, they could get their pace up, I think,
Yeah,
for next season. But
completely
part of it
agree.
too, it just makes me think of, Jamal's motor and just being relentless in motion on offense, like
Yeah.
this one in the fourth quarter. And it partly goes hand in hand with Jalen Brown's kind of physicality, because I think sometimes Jamal was struggling to get himself in position to come for a handoff because Jalen's playing up tight, high up the court, and he can't necessarily push Jalen Brown into the court to get in position to get off the screen more cleanly. There are times where Jalen Brown was doing pretty good at that, and then, he couldn't get to the handoff and had to come into the lane, come back around to get the handoff, things like that, which means you're running around more. Like on this example, there's kind of like a
Well, I
little
mean, that's
brush
how Steph
screen.
plays, right? That's
Yeah,
why he's like the best conditioned player in the
very
NBA.
Steph like, was very reminding me of that. AG kind of has this little brush screen on Jalen Brown here in the lane, so it's almost like it's a zoom action where it's like Jamal's getting the handoff here, and then he's coming around, and Jalen
Oh,
Brown's way
this is,
behind now. So now he's got the separation and can get the shot
yep.
on him and makes it. And that was a tough ass shot. And now the Nuggets are up 4 in the fourth quarter. I liked Murray's fourth quarter a lot too.
I have here he had a fourth quarter flurry. He was in his bag. If we could just play all the baskets from the fourth quarter, because they were all different and all
Yeah.
like impressive.
Well, let's start off because the Celtics had a zone going and to start the
Yeah.
fourth, and Jamal just dribbled right through it. He
Yep.
was just like, "Okay, I'll just go right to the basket," and scored.
Thanks. And
Got
one.
the and one. They couldn't stop him at all on that. So he was just creating rim pressure, driving, like you
Here's
said.
Tatum trying to
Oh,
defend a crafty player. And I mean, it's Jamal. That's the thing is I want to emphasize that again. I had skepticism of Tatum guarding guards before rewatching this game, but watching this game just kind of reconfirmed it. But Jamal is incredible. Like, look at this. This is a tough shot for
yeah,
anybody else, but it's also a shot that you know he can make, and then he made it.
that was the one where I was like, "Dang, Tatum kind of struggles on Jamal."
Everybody on the Celtics struggled on Jamal. I think
Then
Jalen Brown actually probably did the best of anybody across the two matchups, but Jamal still cooked him at times. And you just
yeah,
have to find the right strategy for cooking a particular, look at this, defender. Like Tatum,
yeah.
I think is otherwise a good isolation defender, but Jamal was unbothered by this
It's just
contest.
nothing fancy. It's a zone.
Look,
AG.
you make a 4, try to navigate screens like this. This is something that, like, anybody's gonna get stuck on screens like that, look, and then he creates this separation.
Tatum kind of crosses Murray's plane on the court
Yeah.
because he's trailing. Then he just goes
Mhm.
right to the step back and hits it. And it's a difficult
And
shot,
that
but
step back was really efficient for him last season in the regular season.
mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, here we go, NBA University. He was shooting, as of March 16th, 59.9% effective field goal percentage on step back jumpers this season, 41.3% on step back threes. So definitely one of the most efficient step back jump shot shooters
Mm-hmm.
in the NBA, apparently. Like that just happened last season and it was like not a part of the narrative of Jamal, but he had a lot of great aspects to his regular season, but it's really a matter of like one health, like first and foremost, just like be healthy, be available to play with the team because even if you're not making these spectacular shots, he has this positive impact on the floor just by virtue of how he plays with Jokic. But then when he's in this zone,
Mm-hmm.
no one can stop him.
And that's the
Um,
Jamal that was like in the finals
yeah.
run that we were seeing that just was on another level that I thought, wow, we've unlocked it. We have it. We're the Nuggets. We're going to be a dynasty. And then we have this down year. I think Jamal's going to get back to it. And it's like you could understand how a calf strain is going to really affect someone when that's their game. You need the step back separation. You need the power to get up into the jump shot. And it's all coming from there. And you're going to have like these energy leaks, so to say, when your calf's fucked up. So, it is an excuse, I guess, I'm making for Jamal, but for all the fans that are worried out there, like, I think it's legit. And I think we should give him the benefit of the doubt for this next season and be excited that he's a Nugget again. Because, like, I don't know the stats, but he had an amazing regular season. Other people have been pointing this out. His regular season was up there with some of his best, like his PER is at the top. His averages are close to his career averages. And he just got hurt at the end of the season and couldn't do it in the playoffs. Like, it's bad timing, I know. And we've lost, I guess, 3 postseasons, if you will, because of a Jamal injury, which is a lot. And I get that it's frustrating, but
Yeah, I'm looking at the advanced numbers too because I've gotten into this whole like critiquing EPM thing because some
okay.
of their defensive metrics in particular don't really match up with what I understand of certain players. But
Defense is hard
especially
to
when it comes
measure.
to offensive EPM, and they actually value efficiency like more than I think a lot of advanced metrics do. Jamal actually ranks 14th in offensive EPM last season. Jokic is up there. He's number 2 right behind Luka. And like a large part of that is because of how he plays off of Jokic, right? Like I think that these metrics between players tend to be linked because it's really about impact on the floor. Obviously, if you're playing more with Jokic, he's going to find ways to maximize you. But he also improves how Jokic plays. He takes Jokic had so many spectacular plays in this game, we didn't even get to them. But for every spectacular play that Jamal makes, that's one less that Jokic has to make.
But they
So
both had to make a lot of spectacular
they
plays to
did
win
because
this
no one
game.
else because no one else could even do like normal stuff. But like you said, defensively, he had some moments. I do want to shout out Peyton Watson in particular because he did have some spectacular plays. He does still look like a baby giraffe on offense, and even like there were some plays where I think Tatum like got him.
Mm-hmm.
But I might actually go back and watch the March meeting between these teams that happened in Denver because I do think that Peyton did a better job defensively in that game, just being more just like disciplined positionally. But he had spectacular blocks in this game.
He was the 4th leading scorer. He was kind of like the X factor
for
of the
the
game.
Nuggets, was he
Yeah.
really?
Yeah. It was
Oh God.
Jamal, Jokic, MPJ, PWat. And he played good
That's-
defense. He's played 20 minutes. Christian Brown only played 5. So
yeah,
PWat was
because
kind of,
Christian didn't play in the second half. So
yeah. So it's kind of like the piece that helped get us over the edge a little bit if any other kind of role player had to do it. So good for him.
I just thought that this was Jamal's most impressive game just because you got to see the depth of his bag
Yeah.
and how he can cook even the best of perimeter defenders in a variety of ways. It's one of the reasons that our whole playoff preview really centered around Jamal's matchups with different defenders and what he was going to do in order to take advantage of those matchups. I do think that despite his limitations, he is one of the more versatile offensive stars in the NBA. Now he's going to be paid like it, so he really needs to deliver.
Thanks for taking this trip down memory lane with Grace and I, if you're still watching. But now we're going to go to Would You Rather, where we're going to talk about how some people have been ranking Jamal around the league and if we would rather take some players over Jamal. So
the way that this player list was compiled is by a series of head-to-head matchups, and a bunch of people just voted head-to-head on every player, and you basically get ranked based on what percentage of those interactions you won, those confrontations you won in a vote. Over 145,000 votes were cast in this data gathering exercise.
I didn't do a single one, so of course
I
the
did a
data is going to
lot
be
because I
skewed.
was like, Jokic doesn't have enough votes yet. I need to make sure he ends up no one in this.
Yeah, but Jamal, he was 37th in this ranking. And then let's go a little bit down the list to see if we
It's
at
interesting.
least...
The entire 37 through 41 section that we're in here is all guards, and like Jalen Williams is more of a forward, I guess, if you want to say that.
But it's like Cade Cunningham is 38th.
Yes.
And I would
he
definitely
is.
rather have Jamal over Cade.
Okay. Well, so would the people on this list, apparently, that voted on this.
So good job there. Derek White's 39. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, Derek White is like on his best night. He can be your second option, but I think at most you don't want him to be like more than like your third. Kind of what he played with Kristaps missing so much time last season and Jrue being more of a glue guy, connector type. Derek White was effectively playing point guard for for the Celtics most of last year.
It is kind of hard to contextualize when you're comparing Jamal to some other players, since Jamal has this chemistry on the Nuggets and this role in the Nuggets, whereas if you're plugging in, you're swapping them 1-to-1, what does that look like?
Yeah,
So
but that's what we're doing. We're
when
playing
you're
Would You
looking at
Rather.
this, when we're comparing them, are you actually comparing them like, let's say Jrue Holiday, if he was on the Nuggets, or are you just looking at them in a vacuum?
Oh, yeah, I'm asking about, like, if like, do we want this player on the Nuggets in
Okay.
Jamal's place? Right. So, obviously, positionally, some other guys are gonna be at a disadvantage, but
So let's go with Jrue Holiday.
I'd rather have Jamal.
Okay. What about Scotty
Wait, you have to
Barnes?
answer too.
Yeah, I don't want Jrue Holiday to replace Jamal. I would rather have Jrue Holiday as like our KCP replacement.
Yeah, I think everybody would like to have Jrue Holiday as their 5th option. That's the beauty of the
Exactly.
Boston Celtics.
But Jrue Holiday is ahead of Jamal. Like, if you did look at them in a vacuum, would you say Jamal Murray is technically a better basketball player? Like, a lot of these players are looked upon favorably because they are in a perfect position to really contribute based on he's the 5th option offensively, I guess, but a huge part on defense.
With Jrue, he gets to both be the 5th option offensively, and then also usually doesn't even have to guard the best offensive player on the other team. He gets to play like a free safety role off ball, and sometimes when they need him to like switch on to a Luka Doncic, who, by the way, like Luka loves that matchup. Jrue is a really good, impactful defender, but on the Celtics, just because of the way that that team is constructed, he's not even their like not that he's not their best defender, but he doesn't guard the other team's best player even
Right.
on a consistent basis. So I actually think that Jrue is maybe a little bit overrated in this ranking. I definitely do because I would take Jamal over him, and even in a vacuum. We've seen what second option Jrue Holiday looks like, and it's 2 first round exits 2 years in a row.
There you go.
With the Milwaukee Bucks, or maybe it was they were a second round exit the year before, and then a first round exit.
Would you say he
He
was the
actually had to
second
be the
over?
first option because like Giannis was out almost that entire series versus Miami. Yeah, I didn't like how that looked.
I'll go down the list and I'll start reading names, and I'll assume that you would have Jamal over them, and you just stop me when we get to somebody who like is actually a difficult question.
Okay.
So Scotty Barnes, Carl Towns. So that's crickets on Carl Towns. Chet Holmgren, Pascal Siakam, Sabonis, Trey Young. Any objections there? I would rather have Jamal over Trey easily.
Yeah, because of the off ball stuff.
This is now where we're going to start getting into some tough ones, I think. De'Aaron
I thought
Fox.
I was deciding when they were tough.
Yeah, but I mean, I know you enough, and I know you're
What?
a reasonable human.
I'm
Uh,
no, I'm not a reasonable human. How dare you?
De'Aaron Fox.
See, I actually would have Fox higher on this list. It is a tougher question, but I would have Fox higher on this list.
Okay, so Tyrese Maxey.
I think this is when it starts to become a question, but it's less about what Maxey is now and what I could project him out to be. I don't think that he is anywhere near the level of craft that Jamal does. Both he and Fox have athletic advantages, I think. Like Maxey has so much speed, especially going downhill. Fox and Maxey, like we actually talked about both of them. One of them got the honorable mention just because of the number of miles that they had traveled in the NBA last year. They move around so much, both on and off ball, and they're attacking you in transition and all of this stuff. But in terms of half court basketball, I would pick Jamal over both of those guys as the partner with Jokic. And Jamal obviously has the upper hand because he's had years to, build up that chemistry with Jokic, but you see how it's paid off. So
In Nuggets land, throughout the years of Jamal's career, there's been many hypothetical trades for big stars, and even trades that at the time, before Jamal became Jamal Murray as we know it now and is a champion, where you would think just from a first glance on paper, for like prime James Harden, Nuggets land was turning that down and being like, no, Jamal's chemistry with Jokic is way too valuable. So it's interesting to see, like, at what point does some player just become so good that you would sacrifice Jamal's like chemistry just to get like that talent next to Jokic? It's very
right.
interesting.
We will get to them because I have a couple players in mind. So with Kyrie Irving, I might have taken younger Kyrie over Jamal. But
Okay.
here's a fun fact is that so Jamal was very injured in the Wolves series, obviously had the calf strain, right? he shot, it was like 46% true shooting in that series. It was just atrocious. Kyrie shot the same thing in the NBA Finals with no known ailments versus the same Boston Celtics team that we just saw Jamal completely cook. So if it's current Kyrie or Jamal, I'm taking Jamal, especially because of all of the off-court stuff,
Right.
just on top of him as a player.
That is one that is very hotly debated, I feel like, among NBA fans. I see people getting in
I've
debates
never heard
about
that.
Kyrie versus Jamal all the time. It's
Maybe
so
because
funny to
they
me.
are similar as players, like I said, but I had never heard that debate, that specific debate before.
I think that came up a lot after we won the finals, where like The Ringer, for example, or even ESPN, which we might take a little glance at the Ringer rankings, had Jamal over Kyrie, and that like upset a bunch of people. So
Well, that's because the Mavs sucked and the Nuggets were just awesome, right?
yep.
All these lists are based on heavily on recency bias, but I'd still take Jamal.
So Damian Lillard, someone I wouldn't want over Jamal, but that has been debated too.
I would take Jamal, but this one is where it gets like, I wouldn't like debate someone really hard over it, right? Because the shooting value that Dame provides just opens everything up on the interior, and you could see that being a really nice match with Jokic. The main questions really being the defense, but I think that they're kind of comparable.
Yeah, it's tough. It's not like an easy decision, especially if it's like prime Damian Lillard. I'm talking about this one now, who's still fine. We'll see how he is this season. So now we're getting to a bunch of like forwards, which is kind of weird. But like, do you think Jamal's better than any of these players or all of them? Just purely
Well, we
off.
haven't seen Zion in the playoffs yet. Paolo Banchero, apparently giant playoff riser, so question mark. We've seen one series from him. And then he becomes the most efficient mid-range shooter in the playoffs in one series in his second year in the NBA. So that could be kind of scary. So I think that's a question mark. I think Paolo might be a little too highly rated on this, and it might
Yeah,
be
that's pretty
again because of
high.
the recency bias of his playoff run. I think that's pretty high. Tyrese Halliburton was all NBA this year.
Let's look really quick where Paolo is on this ringer thing, because, oh, here he is. He's 29th on this one. So
Okay.
24th on the other one, 29th here, right above Ja Morant.
I think I'd
Um,
have him. Yeah, I guess I'd have him kind of with Lowry. I think Ja is being underrated in this, but I understand like downgrading him because he hasn't like been on the floor enough, to get credit for that.
like Jamal's 20th in the ringer rankings for those of you who are listening and watching. Right in front of Zion at 21 and right behind
I
Jimmy
think that's kind of
Butler.
crazy. I don't know that I would put Jamal ahead of Zion just as a player, even though I'd rather obviously have him for our team.
Yeah. Jamal was a arguably top 15 player after the finals. Now, I don't know where he's going to be. He could be anywhere from 40 to 20. I think Jalen Brown, everyone's going to say he's better than Jamal.
I'm
That's a
not.
tough one.
I
Yeah.
think I mean, Jalen Brown is a Finals MVP, though.
Tyrese Halliburton, that's a tough one.
Ooh, that is tough because my gosh, he plays with so much pace. He's got the shooting, the playmaking. This is where it starts to get tough because if Tyrese Halliburton wasn't a literal sieve on defense, I think
Mm,
I would clearly take him over Jamal. Not that Jamal has had really like the best defensive year either in the playoffs or in the regular season. But you've seen him do it. Whereas with Halliburton, you're just like, oh my gosh, like what is happening right now? But he can really elevate a lineup. This is another like I won't fight you on it, and even I'm maybe leaning Hallie,
well, he's
but
just so
I gotta go
young,
with my guy
too.
Jamal. He is so young, like so there's like upside there too.
Then you got Ja Morant. I mean, so Ja Morant's next, number 18.
So Ja is 25 right now. Ja has a bit more talent. Like he's much better at the things that he does.
Hmm.
But they both have like Ja has the injury thing and the off court stuff, and like Jamal obviously has the injury thing. So I'm factoring all of that in. So it's kind of a wash for me to where I'm like, even if he was on the team, like he might be better at the things that he does, and that could make up for the not as perfect of a fit
Yeah. I
next
think
to
the fit
Jokic.
is why I would still pick Jamal. All right, so I think I'm gonna skip,
Okay, Bam's gonna be ranked higher, but obviously I'm taking Jamal. We can skip the forwards.
but let's get to Jalen Brunson because he's 15th on this list. That's another tough one.
Yeah, I
kind of
think that
similar.
Jalen, he's a much better carrier than Jamal. I don't even think that he would be a bad fit. Like, I think this is actually the one where it's like the closest deadlock. And I might even be inclined to pick Brunson over Jamal just because of the consistency. And he's got the outside shooting. Like, he's pretty versatile himself.
He's got the rim pressure. He's got the midi. He can operate. Does a lot of things that Jamal does for us.
He's smaller, but like functionally not.
He may be more reliable at this point to like take pressure off Jokic more often.
Yeah.
Which I'm sorry to say.
I think this is the one where I would
That's so crazy
Brunson,
to me.
but it's like a slight lean.
That's so
It's
tough.
funny because actually last year, even after the title run, I was like, these two are much closer players than a lot of people think. And then obviously, like Brunson has a MVP caliber season this next year.
Yeah, I guess I would rather have Brunson at this point. Prove us wrong, Jamal, and take back this.
You know, if Jamal had taken the kind of discount that Brunson took for the Knicks, then I would have said, "Oh yeah, obviously Jamal," because then you have that on top of it. It's like Brunson would be willing to take a discount on his contract.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's just funny too because I think we were just talking about how Jamal was ranked in the top 15. We just arrived to the 15th player in this little ranking. Yeah, so this is kind of the threshold where you're passing, where it kind of becomes no question who you're going to be taking because it's like.
Well, I mean, I think that I don't necessarily agree with this player ranking. So let's actually keep going through some things.
14.
I would take
Devin Booker.
I would take Jamal over Devin Booker because of the versatility and the playmaking. I think Ja should be above Booker because I think that Ja's like better at the things that he does. So even if he's not like the perfect fit like that. Also, like, who knows? If Devin Booker had been playing next to Jokic for the last however many years, maybe he'd be a better playmaker than he is, but he just isn't. Like, we saw the Devin Booker at point guard experiment, and it didn't go well. That's why they have 3 new point guards on their roster this year, and I think that aspect is important.
Would you have LeBron as point guard next to Jokic instead of Jamal?
Oh, my God, LeBron next to Jokic?
Who's guarding the other team's guards, though? Well, I mean Jamal already doesn't
Jamal
do
guarding
that.
the other team's guards, exactly. So we would just play super big and whatever. And actually, like, talk about taking pressure off of Jokic. Even at age 39, LeBron could do that.
All right, Anthony Edwards, I would take.
Yeah.
Sorry, Jamal. This one I wouldn't, though. Donovan Mitchell.
Donovan Mitchell, I think, is interesting because he's kind of a Brunson type, except I think he's not as good playing off ball. So I would take Jamal for that reason. Well, he does apply more rim pressure.
Jamal hasn't looked great off ball either recently.
But we know he can.
I hope so.
Like, we've seen him do it. Like, he needs to do it more consistently. That's something that I'm going to be demanding of him.
I think Mitchell's way too high on this.
I agree.
Where is he?
Is he higher than Steph on this list?
No, but Donovan Mitchell's 16th in the Ringer Top 100, which I don't know. These are just random lists. It's not like these are the definitive lists. Just some interesting ones that
that's why we're talking about.
We're just taking the pulse of like the perception of where these players are. Donovan Mitchell's not above Steph. Steph is at 8. Victor Wembanyama's 9. Obviously, you're taking Steph over Jamal.
I'm obviously taking Steph. I'm taking Steph next to Jokic over any guard.
Yeah, that's like the number one dream guard.
Too good.
He fits good with almost anybody. And then the last guards are Shai and Luka. Shai is number 4, Luka's number 3. Because a lot of people have floated this whole idea of like Luka coming to the Nuggets at some point, and then you're like,
no, I hate that idea.
What's Jamal doing?
Luka needs multiple lob threats. Jokic is not that.
Well, you got AG.
It's just not the best way to maximize either of them, frankly. I do think that Luka would help Jokic, though, because he does have the outside shooting. He's great in pick and roll, although I think he's great in pick and roll when he's got a real lob threat. Like, we've seen what that looks like when your lob threat is Dwight Powell, for example. And Jokic is not even jumping that high, to catch those. But I think the Mavs missed having a real post threat against the Celtics in the finals, and that was clear. They had Daniel Gafford post-ups as like the most reliable offense. Wouldn't go back to it because why would you go back to it? Shai or Luka next to Jokic, which is the better fit? That's a great question.
I like Shai's defense more than Luka. So maybe by
Yeah.
just that alone would be nice. And he
But
has the
Luka wouldn't be
ISO.
guarding guards. He would have to guard like fours.
Luka and Jokic are already thought of as some like lower defensive ability players. So it's like you're putting two of them,
Yeah.
together. Sorry to, I
Yeah.
don't know.
Let's not. Let's go with Shai then.
Yeah.
Although Shai's on ball is like overrated, but it's fine.
He can do the ISO. I mean, both are ISO, like they're the best ISO players in the league. So,
Yes. I like Shai's. So the thing with Shai is that I think you need more shooting players around him. But we're just talking about like just Jokic. Like, let's pretend we don't know the other three players. But I think that like Shai and Jokic is a better fit than Luka and Jokic, but it might be more constraining for the players around him just because Shai really likes to have that space and operate in the mid range, whereas Luka can maybe make shots from anywhere. And he's a better playmaker. I think that has to be the tiebreaker. Shai does not have anywhere near the court vision of Luka. So in terms of playing with the other players, but Luka's so ball dominant. I'd rather have Jamal. Just give me Jamal so I don't have to think about
we're just
this.
picking Jamal over Luka and Shai. It's been decided. The only people
Yeah.
we're taking over Jamal is Jalen Brunson and Steph and Ant.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yeah.
Which is kind of funny when you consider all the people clamoring for a trade. It's like, who are you guys looking? There's
Trading
only
to where nobody's going to trade for a guy in the last year of his contract, which he's no longer because he is, extended. That's just one last thing I want to say about this is that people want to know if this contract will be tradable. The fact of the matter is, if Jamal plays well enough to, live up to the value of this contract, you're not going to want to trade him. And if he doesn't, then it will not be tradable. So Jamal's not going anywhere is the moral of the story.
You could always send him to Detroit, though.
No, you
They'll
can't. They have
take
to
any contract.
No, they won't because you'd have to give up picks. So we're going to trade Jamal and picks. You're not going to trade your first round picks for that. You're going to have to move first round picks to move a contract that big. That's why Zeke is still on the roster.
I'm just saying, like, I think there's a lot of discourse around contracts and them becoming untradeable. And I think no matter what happens, Jamal's contract would be tradable. It just is what are you getting back then, which is getting worse and worse and worse and worse the worse he plays. So that concludes our Jamalapalooza, I guess, is what I would say.
That's what it was, wasn't it? Jamalapalooza.
It's just a full Jamal episode.
That's what we're calling this episode. Well, thanks for everybody for sticking around this long. Over half of you are not subscribed to the channel. So if you do like our content, please remember to subscribe, hit the like button, share it, hit the notification bell, leave us a review, a 5-star review, preferably, on Spotify, Apple Music, and Amazon Music. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok at What's in a Game NBA. We also have our new clip channel in the description. The link is in the description at What's in a Game NBA clips. And always remember that winning is fun and losing sucks. Let's get back to winning.